Hello, and welcome to another episode of IPPS-A Live. Today, we have Colonel Johnson and Major Luoma here with us to talk about IPPS-A. We're going to provide an update, talk through the Army Organization Server, known as AOS, and then talk a little bit more about the IPPS-A mobile app. Throughout the town hall, we'll be taking questions from users. So if you have questions, please feel free to ask them in the chat bar throughout the live session, and we will get to as many as possible. Any questions we don't get to, we'll post the answers in our closed Facebook group. Before we get started, we want to remind you that you can find a copy of these slides in the chat. Colonel Johnson, passing the mic to you, sir.
All right, thanks, Harper. Really excited for today's session. Thanks for those that are out in the the Army world that's plugged in today to talk what I think is one of the most interesting topics to cover as we get prepared to go live in December of 21 for release 3. And that's the Army organizational server and how that plugs into IPPS-A, how it provides the structure for IPPS-A, and how those two will work together as we go live to man the Army with our material solution for a whole lot of things in the HR community. If you want to go one slide forward, I'm also, pretty excited that, for all you basketball fans, that 3 Pac-12 teams are in the Elite Eight. The West Coast, I continue to tell folks on the team is the best coast. So it's proven out in basketball, and Gonzaga may win it all, and they're kind of a West Coast team. But excited about basketball, but I'm probably more excited about IPPS-A and where we're headed. Most of you that have been plugging into our sessions or our engagements have seen this slide. This is really just showing 4 key areas of functionality that are tied to release 3, business intelligence, talent management, customer relations module, and then basic HR support. All of those are laid out on this slide. I think for today's session, it's important to note that our structure is coming from a system called the Army Organizational Server, and organizations will have requirements to update that structure in that system, which is the authoritative system for structure in the United States Army. So, number one, I think that's probably one of the key takeaways from today is that we're going to use the authoritative data source for structure, that being AOS. We're not going to manipulate that inside of IPPS-A. In past HR systems, that's kind of what we've done, but we're moving towards a scenario where we're just taking the authoritative data from the authoritative sources. So let's transition one more slide. Really, I think one of the smartest folks in the Army in this topic is Kyle Luoma, who's going to take the mic here in a second. He's been in our team for quite a while. He used to be a FA50. I don't know. He's a whole lot of things. He's a data guy. He's a coder. He's just a really smart staff officer. But he's also what I would consider the kind of the foremost expert in how this is going to work and what Army Org Server is all about and what GFMDI compliant is, et cetera. So I'm going to pass it to him. Kyle, the floor is yours.
Thanks, sir, for that great introduction. Hopefully I'll live up to it here in the next few minutes. Hello to everybody out there in the Army. I can't see you, but you can see me, which is pretty exciting. So the next few slides I'm going to go over really, as Colonel Johnson mentioned, talk about the Army Org Server, which is a shared system between the Army G3, who owns our MTOs and TDAs and force structure, and us in the Army G1 and the human resources side. And we'll get into what that looks like here in the next few slides. I want to make one thing really clear up front is this is a force structure system, the Army Org Server, and it's not IPPS-A, it's not part of IPPS-A, but it connects to IPPS-A, and it's a critical part of generally how we do talent management and strength management. So we're bringing 2 systems together that are separate and distinct systems in different environments on different servers owned by different system owners, but they talk to each other, and the way they're coupled really drives this idea of shared ownership, which is something that you see in the center of the slide. So backing up a little bit from that, the Army org server is basically, as the slide says, it's the authoritative source of Army force structure for IPPS-A. Now, with that said, AOS is sort of a system among other systems that also do the job of managing Army force structure. Others that, if you're in the Army, not a force manager, you've probably worked with or seen or been in is FMS Web, Force Management System Web, which is sort of the web page view of our MTOs and TDAs. Well, those systems continue to exist as well. And those legacy force management systems like FMS, MTO, FMS TDA, SAMUS, other systems that you may or may not have heard of, feed structure data, that MTO TDA data, into AOS. And then AOS does this thing with it where it turns it into this Global Force Management Data Initiative compliance structure, which essentially is a really fancy way of saying it takes it from MTO TDA flat files and turns it into a really hierarchical structure, linking everything together, expanding things out down to the very granular level at the lowest level that then passes over to IPPS-A in order for us to perform strength management, talent management, assignments, you name it. Anything related to structure in the HR side relies on the data coming over from AOS. And while that sounds complicated and you might think, oh, well, we're moving towards something that's more complex, more difficult to deal with, some of that payment we're paying up front and getting things right with the complexity. And then what that's going to turn into is a long-term benefit to us as we move into the ability to manage things at a much more detailed level across the Army for strength and talent management. The last thing I want to say on this slide is just the way acquisitions, modernization across the Army works, especially when you're fielding material systems, things change over time. So if you had dialed in 3 years ago, you might have heard that AOS was replacing everything as sort of this interim operational capability, and it was going to take over FMS Web, it was going to take over SAMUS and force registration and all that stuff. Now, as of today, I really want you to think of AOS as sort of complementary to those systems. And so while AOS is IPPS-A's authoritative source of structure, it's interfacing with those legacy systems. And so AOS is the place to go to get the GFMDI compliant structure with everything linked together, all those dynamic links to stable elements within the system. But you're still going to be able to go to FMS Web and view your MTOs and TDAs in that legacy structure. And that's not going to change until everything, including AOS and FMS and all that, gets replaced out in the future in like FY25. And that's another brief for another time, but just wanted to make sure that was also understood. As AOS is very complementary. It sits in there with the other systems, and then it feeds IPPS-A as sort of that focal point of structure to the HR domain. If we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so more specifically within AOS, what does AOS then provide to IPPS-A that the other structure systems don't? Well, up in the upper left, this is where we start on the slide, and you can kind of see the slide progress as an equation going from top to bottom, left to right. And so we start with the past, current, and future MTOs and TDAs that get loaded into AOS. And what's key about that piece is past, current, and future. Of course, we know we have the MTO and TDA structure data in AOS. That's a given. We have to have that in order for us to assign people to our organizations. However, the really neat thing about AOS that is a big improvement over legacy systems is our ability to trace organizational changes over time. And anytime the Army publishes a new set of fiscal year documents, so for example, this coming September, when the FY23 documents get posted, well, those are all going to load into AOS, and then we'll be able to see not just what our organizations look like today, but we'll be able to see what they look like next year. And then we can also roll it back and look into the past. So there's a really neat time dynamic in AOS that also feeds over to IPPS-A that we can use in our business intelligence and our reporting. On top of that, then we have these relationships, these GFMDI or Global Force Management Data Initiative hierarchies that link units together. So, and it's not just one relationship, one hierarchy. You can have multiple different hierarchies that describe different kinds of command and control relationships between organizations. So what we've historically done in the Army in orders books and operations orders and spreadsheets and org charts and things like that is sort of a native capability of GFMDI and how AOS implements GFMDI. So if you've ever had the chance to get into AOS and take a look at it and see it, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, reach out to me after this if you or your organization wants access to AOS, and you can see it for yourself. Temporary positions then. So there's this global force management data imperative on the personnel side that's much more restrictive than what we can do with our current system. So in eMilpo and TAPDBR, we can double slot people, we can excess code people without putting them in a paragraph and line number. We can put them in UICs or units that don't even have any structure at all. And the system works just fine that way. In GFMBI, which is what AOS and IPPS-A implement, we have this rule where you can only have one person in one position. And it's taking that one person and putting them in that one position together then encumbers that position, and you can't put anyone else in the position. And this is even true for our transient, trainee, holdie, and student populations. Anyone in a schoolhouse and TRADOC, any overstrength, left seat, right seat, incoming, outgoing personnel in a unit, only one of those people can have the actual billet. The other person has to go into this thing called a temporary billet, which is shortened to template. And so that's something that starts its existence inside of AOS. If you go to MTOs or TDAs in the legacy systems, you won't see templates or temporary billets in there. But when you go into AOS, you're going to see all these AOS managed, command managed temporary structure objects in the system. And that's necessary for managing those populations in IPPS-A and giving them a position to assign them to. On top of all that, then also in AOS, we have external organization positions, joint interagency other service organizations. That's something we're working with the Army G3 Force Management community right now to make sure that we are able to load in those sister service and those joint and DoD service requirements into the system so that we're able to assign our Army population to those external organizations. And then finally, after that, and this is kind of where some of that co-ownership comes in that's touched on the previous slide, we're loading in this human resource specific, G1 specific, and U.S. Army Reserve human resource specific data into the system. And much of this extra HRC and G1 specific data ties back to things like DML and DMSL, PPA, different ways of organizing the data to associate it with personnel service centers, the PMAT and the UAD data, personnel manning authorization document. I'll touch on that on the next slide from the G1. Because AOS is sort of this co-ownership between G1 and G3, we have our spot inside of AOS where we manage HR-specific data associated with organizations. And then finally, on top of that, we've got location data. So if you think about a lot of what we do on the personnel side with regards to distributing talent across the Army is literally physically distributing talent across the Army in the terms of giving someone an assignment order to a specific unit that's located at a specific place. And if that unit is, N number of miles away from where they currently are, they're entitled to PCS entitlements. And then when they get there, they have to file their orders that come from IPPS-A Release 3, and those orders have a location on them. Well, that location comes from AOS, and that location goes to DFAS and says, hey, this person is entitled to these location-based entitlements. And so you can start to see, okay, well, it's really important then that the data in AOS is right and correct and complete, because as it comes to IPPS-A, and then IPPS-A uses it within its business processes, and then the output of that is pay impacting actions that absolutely affect our soldiers. So it's definitely important that even though AOS isn't part of IPPS-A, it is very much a part of personnel processes because we rely so much on the location data and other structure data from AOS to be correct. So all of that stuff added together equals a foundational single source of all organization data for IPPS-A. And I can't stress it enough when I say how important it is to us that AOS is complete in its data, complete in its description of our organizations and where they're located, and complete in how many positions are available within those structures. And if you're on the call and this is not new to you, and you've been participating in the AOS efforts thus far, you know that it's a big effort. We've been spending over a year across the Army training commands, working with commands at many levels to get into AOS, teach everyone how to use it, and then get in there and start making sure the structure is correct. If you're new to it, welcome to the team. And if you want to learn more about it, get deeper into the training and stuff on AOS, please reach out to me as well. Okay, so if we could go to the next slide, please. And before I jump on, there was a question from Chief Duwa, 8th Army. Hey, Chief, it's good to see you again. And your question is, will templates require an update when new MTO TDA is loaded and the paragraph line number changes? So actually, that's an excellent question, and something I want to kind of mention with regards to these temporary billets. So the name of these templates is temporary billet, which makes you think in your mind, well, it's this billet that's only there temporarily, and I'm going to have to keep creating new ones as the temporary ones go away. But fortunately for us, the temporary part really refers to the type of assignment that you make against the temporary billet. So you have temporary assignments against these billets, and then as soon as an authorized position or permanent billet is available, you put someone in the permanent billet. However, the temporary billets, they stay in the organization as long as the UIC of the unit doesn't change. Then the home station derivative for that unit remains the same, and all the temporary billets stay inside the unit as well. So every time you go through a document change or something like that, doesn't affect the availability of those templates. Those templates will always be there. So a lot of the work that we've been doing over the past year plus now has been really to make sure units have enough templates within their organizations. And that's a big lift. But as we go live, once everyone has a spot in AOS, the sustainment of that is going to diminish over time, because once you've set up that baseline number for your organization, you keep it there and you don't have to mess with it again, unless you have some exceptional circumstance like we experienced over the last year with COVID, where all of a sudden maybe you have more people in your organization than you've ever had before. Then you might have to do something with it. But other than that, it's going to be pretty much steady state. So looking at this and how AOS modernizes enterprise strength management. So there are some benefits to what we're doing. We're not just doing it because the Joint Staff and the DoD said we had to be GFMDI compliant, but there's reasons for this GFMDI initiative that go beyond just because they told us to do it. And most of those have to do with being able to describe our organizations more consistently across not just the Army, but across all of the services to improve the interoperability, not just between information systems, but also between processes and services. Because if we standardize the way we describe ourselves from a hierarchy and a unit perspective, not just within the Army, but across the services, then we can send this data that describes ourselves over to other places within and outside of the Army and get the same picture. So what I want to show kind of in the upper left is currently how we kind of derive our views of ourselves within the Army. And this is just one example. This is what HRC does. They have these things called DML and DMSL, where they at HRC manage buckets of UICs based on kind of where they line up in the organization, at the brigade level, the division level, for organizations where brigades and divisions are how we organize things. And then they call those DMLs and DMSLs, and then they manage that very extensively within HRC to make sure that all of the systems within HRC kind of know each unit and where it is and stuff, so they have the same language. Other organizations across the Army that I've been part of as a force manager, everyone has a different way of describing the organizations, and most of the time it ends up being described in an Access database or an Excel spreadsheet or something, or an op order or a line and block chart in a PowerPoint. Which is all well and good. We have to organize ourselves locally. But what happens with that is that how I describe myself over here isn't compatible with how you describe yourself over there, or maybe how you describe me and I describe you. And it creates this inability to really see ourselves consistently across the Army, which is why when we try to build Army level dashboards of readiness, we run into all these problems where our senior leaders don't understand, well, why can't we see ourselves correctly? Well, a lot of that has to do with the fact that up until recently, we haven't really had a consistent way of describing ourselves as an organization. What GFMDI does for us and takes us closer to this goal, although it's not perfect yet, it's still got a lot of work for us to do and a lot of room to grow. What GFMDI does for us, though, is it gives us a standardized, sort of natively structured way of describing our organizations and linking everything together. And just like the slide in the upper right shows, kind of there's this linkage between ACOMs, Corps, Division, Brigade, Battalion, kind of a force com example, all the way down to squad and individual billet. That's entirely accurate with what AOS allows us to do. And not only that, but you can also kind of show different hierarchical relationships. So under one relationship, the admin default relationship, you could have your company reporting to one battalion, and then you could have this other sort of habitual relationship between that company and another battalion that's described in a different relationship. Both are valid, both are present in the system, and you can build reports against one or both or either of them. And it just gives you a lot more flexibility. And then not only that, but it gives you flexibility in your system to view yourselves a particular way, but also other systems to view the organization in the same way, because the data is the same no matter what system you're looking at. So that's some of the power of GFMDI in terms of kind of being able to report ourselves at just about every level from ACOM down to the squad level. The other benefit of AOS and GFMDI in general is this concept of assignment detail and durability. So on the left side, what I show is sort of what a squad looks like on an MTO, and you have paragraph line numbers that include multiple authorizations. And in fact, some MTOs have multiple companies or platoons represented in one document, so you have 3 platoon leaders in one line. What AOS does, and sort of in the process of moving from the legacy system over to the AOS system, is it does what's called shredding. It takes all of those consolidated authorizations and puts them into individual billets and gives each one of those billets a unique identifier called an FMID. And what that allows us to do is have distinct squads, distinct platoons, distinct companies inside the system, separate from each other, that people are assigned to, that really enables us to view things like squad level readiness. And squad level attention is something that's really important to us right now. Or this is my squad initiative and things of that nature. I mean, this is sort of the IT solution to being able to see ourselves down at that level of detail and being able to see who within your organization is assigned within each one of those billets that exist within a squad or team or similar type of organization. So there's another question in there. I believe it's published already. The question is, will the temporary billet show up on the soldier's SRB? If so, will the S1 have the responsibility to clear up the soldier's SRB? So that is an excellent question. So one of the lessons we learned in release 2, and we were able to take into the design of release 3 in the assignments module, was that there are going to be many cases where soldiers are assigned to temporary billets for a period of time, and you want their record to show what they were doing, not just the temporary billet. And so one thing we were able to do as part of the assignments design for release 3 was provide a list of duty descriptions for a soldier that could be selected for their assignment, even if they're in a template. So yes, they'll show up as being assigned to a template, but you'll have the duty description available to you from a range of selections relative to the soldier's job or their MOS. Okay, if we could go to the next slide, please. Okay, so we're getting kind of near the end of my section. This last slide here is another view of strength management, sort of more of an enterprise level. So the last slide was showing kind of how to get down to the individual billet, squad, platoon level of visibility, and showing the power of how detailed we can get and how we view ourselves. This one is talking more about process flow and data flows across the Army. So in the upper left, going to upper right, shows kind of how the current strength management requisition process works between Army G3FM, who publishes the MTOs and TDAs, Army G1 PR, who creates what's called the Personnel Manning Authorization document, where they sort of apply constraints of personnel levels across the Army. They apply active component manning guidance and things like that to modify the authorizations for each unit before sending it over to HRC to tell HRC, okay, these are the strength levels we want you to maintain at all the units across the Army, based on all the analysis and the priority integration that we've done. That path of data goes from FMS over to this system called PAM that sits in Army G1 that only a few people have access to, and then it goes over to HRC and goes through, their ITAP system, and it goes into this SFARS system that HRC manages, where they turn these things into targets and requisitions. That goes out, for distribution, and then people get assigned on orders to Army units, based on that process. In the meantime, or meanwhile, you've got Army units, you've got commanders out there reporting Army, unit status reporting every month, readiness, but forming these expectations and reporting against the basic MTO requirements. And it has nothing to do with kind of what G1 is modified and how HRC has taken that. And so right now there's kind of this friction or this disconnect between expectations from the field and the reality from HRC when you're constantly reporting lower than required authorized strength in your unit because G1 is decrementing and HRC is only distributing to the G1 decrement. So it's a really complicated process, and I'm probably not helping clear it up much right now because it is complicated. But the bottom line on it is we're able to integrate a lot of what's being done in those disparate systems outside the view of the regular Army. We're able to integrate that into both AOS and IPPS-A. So as G3FM publishes the structure, it goes into AOS. As G1 publishes the PMAD, the output of the PMAD also goes into AOS, and both of that data goes into IPPS-A. And so HRC distributes off of the same thing that Army units will be able to see in IPPS-A and AOS. And there's not going to be any more of this opacity in the process where if you're in an Army unit, unless you happen to know someone in G1 or HRC and you can pick up the phone and call them, now you can go into AOS, now you can go into IPPS-A, and you can see within those systems if anything has changed from the basic structure to the PMAD that HRC is using to feed the marketplace for job openings. So really moving us toward a much better place in terms of how we can see ourselves in our processes. And then on the bottom side, we're talking about consolidation of all manning requirements. So just like I touched on earlier with those joint billets coming into AOS, HRC right now kind of has to juggle lots of different sources of information to identify where to send people across the Army. Joint billets, PMAD, UAD, YS taskers, those sorts of things. One of our objectives with AOS is to consolidate as much of that as possible into AOS. One of the driving factors on that is anything that you can assign someone to in IPPS-A has to have an FMID, which is that ID for a position in AOS. The only way anything is going to have an FMID is if it came from AOS. So AOS is almost like a gatekeeper for any kind of manning requirement within the Army. If it's not in AOS, then it's not something that we can distribute someone to in a marketplace. So AOS sort of becomes this natural focal point for all organizational information used for strength management. Okay, I see a question from Anonymous there. It says, will we still be able to pull just medical positions like we can with TAD's CGA button? I'm not really familiar with the TAD CGA button, but it sounds to me like that is a query tool similar to what you have in FMS Web. And so, like I said at the beginning of this brief, AOS and the legacy force management systems that have the TADS type of data in it, they're kind of complementary right now. So if you can't query just medical position out of AOS, which probably you would have trouble doing just because of the way AOS has data structured hierarchically, you'd still be able to do that work on the FMS side in the meantime while both systems kind of exist cooperatively. But that's a great question. Okay, if we could go to the next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to just address some of the last few questions here, and then sir, I'm going to pass it back over to you. Chief Duwaz got a follow-up question. How persistent is the AOS and IPPS-A? If I need a template built, okay, so I get what you're asking. So the connection between AOS and IPPS-A feeds nightly, essentially. If you build a template in AOS before 1900 Eastern Standard Time, it will be in IPPS-A when you wake up in the morning. So it's a very quick process, relatively, almost near real time. Okay, another question is target information included in the IPPS-A strength management reports? Yes, we're building the strength management focused reports on the IPPS-A side. Target information, I'm nearly certain is part of that specification. And then the final question is, will IPPS-A auto-populate personnel against positions based on unit readiness, i.e. USR report 85% mandatory? So I think what's being asked there is, will IPPS-A kind of auto-slot people to optimize USR readiness? No, IPPS-A is not going to auto-populate personnel against positions, that's still going to be a responsibility of the HR professionals within organizations to make sure people are slotted correctly. There still has to be a human in the loop on that, because it has a big effect on people's records and things like that. So there's still going to be a requirement for people to slot them. Now, with that said, though, when we're reporting readiness against units, we report readiness at a lower level now so that your readiness counts if you have a person in the actual position. So how a personnel manager, HR manager slots people in an organization will impact how a unit's readiness report is viewed, but it's going to be incumbent on them and their responsibility to make sure that the right people are in the right positions within their organizations.
Hey, but Kyle, I would also add that HRC, EP, and OP, they're working off a specific recs and filling names against those recs. So to a certain extent, HRC is putting folks into specific paragraph and line numbers tied to what's being generated at AOS, what gets over to HRC, how they're doing their own requisition analysis, et cetera, and then really by the each's brigades and division core strength managers are then moving people where they need to go. So one really positive functionality in IPPS-A is that the strength managers will be able to change those inbound gains into other units and other positions based on prioritization from commanders. So you can't do that today. I mean, you're not changing enlisted assignments until folks get on the ground. That's one of the big capabilities we'll get in the future, but just circling up on there. And Kyle, I wanted to circle back to another comment. For me, a good amount of what where we're headed with IPPS-A and the integration of AOS or GFMDI and IPPS-A is a level of transparency that we've literally never had in the Army. And in this case, we're talking about transparency of what are your structure documents looking like, and then what are these decrements tied to the PMAD-UAD, tied to the targets and requirements that HRC are executing on the active side. So from an active perspective, the game changer with IPPS-A is that everybody gets to see this in the system now. There's not like 7 systems between you at the battalion level and what HRC is doing. You are all in the same system now, IPPS-A, and that level of transparency, I think, will be mind-blowing for lots of folks as we get started, because you'd be like, hey, I'm seeing this, and then you're talking to your HRC account manager, and he's like, I'm seeing the same thing. You guys are all seeing the same thing because there's only one system that's used for accountability, tracking, strength management, et cetera, and that's IPPS-A. What this shift though from structure is that we're not manipulating structure in each HR system. You're utilizing the authoritative system, this Army org server, as the baseline of where the structure is coming into IPPS-A. And then obviously Kyle's already talked, some of the policies are changing as to why we're doing this. But primarily it's to get all on the same sheet of music. And many of you probably have seen me do briefs in the past where we literally are talking about 200 different personnel and pay systems. Literally, I mean, 200 in the Army. I mean, we're in 2021 and, there was hundreds of systems, and then most of those systems were consuming structured data and manipulating it. So then if you were trying to roll up who's in what unit, where are they at in that unit? You can't. It's just a total mess. And so these big analytic tools have had problems as we've rolled that information. One other piece on this slide. This slide's like a PhD level slide. I find that we have a hard time explaining to even the smartest people, how has this looked in the legacy system, and then really where are we headed, in a modernized system architecture the Army's developing as we speak. But this is just, we're going to have reps as we continue to go, and then build in capability too after we go live in release 3. But we're pretty excited about this. Some will view it as more work, but it's about learning how this plays into how we man, how we track, how we manage. The other comment I would make is this is the intersection of responsibilities between the G3, the FM, and the G1. If you go downrange and you've been used to task organization manning requirements as little units move around the battlefield and organizational roles change. Usually it's a G1, G3/G5 role. I know for my 3 deployments, I was always heavily involved in that at the divisional G1 level with the 5 or the 3. This is just really taking that, what we would do downrange, and really bifurcating that responsibility requirement here for all of us, whether you're at home station or not. So that's one of the changes that comes, but there's a lot of reasons that Kyle laid out already that highlight a lot of that. So Kyle, any thoughts on any of that?
Yes, sir. I mean, it just goes back to, we can see at every level what's going on. So whether you're in OP MD at HRC, or you're at a company at a unit somewhere, looking at the same person on the same assignment to your organization, I mean, just the way the data is now consistently structured allows for that single view of the system. So I think you really hit the nail on the head there. And the other thing I'll say with that is, all of this stuff is really awesome, and we're really moving in the right direction. But I would say also we're still moving, and it's still going to take a lot of work to get to where we're perfect. But I'd say that with GFMDI as sort of the enabler, we have a framework that, as long as we stick to it and we continue to modernize and improve our systems over time, if we stick to that basic framework of the sort of interoperable, very detailed, descriptive data standard, that we're going to really get to a point in the Army where we wonder how we did business before at all, given the new capabilities that we're already starting to see.
Yeah, that's a good point. And folks, if you're listening out there, I think there's about 200 people on now, Kyle. So that's a mini record that we're driving this kind of participation in a thing called Army Org Server. If you guys want to listen to more specifics on AOS than even what we just covered over the last 10 minutes, me and Kyle, I think we wrapped about 50 minutes worth. It's on the AOS podcast, the IPPS-A podcast, with the topic of AOS and GFMDI. I think that dropped on our Facebook page on 12 March. But that's on most of our different sites. You can get into S1net and download it. It's on YouTube, and I think it's hanging on our Facebook page as well. So if you guys want to get a little more, I guess, listening to this scenario and some specifics, that I'd push you to that resource that we have out there already. Okay. I thought I was going to get you to be able to talk a little bit about the Pac-12, Kyle, but since you didn't bite on that, I know you're a Fullerton guy, so they probably beat you up a little bit, the Pac-12.
AOS takes up all my time, sir. It's hard to follow sports these days.
Yeah, that's fair. That is fair. All right, let's go to the next. I guess it's the video. We're gonna show you a little bit about mobile here, so I'll be quiet and let's roll the tape.
Hey there, I'm Sergeant First Class Martinez. You know what it's like to wait in line, sometimes for hours at the S1 shop, or be told to come back later, just to do things like update your personnel record, check your promotion points, submit personnel actions like leave requests, and fix pay issues? It's not fun and not the best use of your time. So that's changing.
You've heard of IPPS-A, right? The new system that will do personnel and pay for the whole Army? Yeah, that thing. So it's kind of a big deal. And they've made an IPPS-A app so that you can do all those things you'd normally have to do at the S1 shop right from your phone. So for the first time, you could submit a leave request and then be able to track its status, all from your phone, no matter where you are, whether you're at work, at home, wherever, just like you would do anything else on your phone. All you need to do is install the IPPS-A app on your phone. If you haven't already, install the Tag Mobile app from Tradoc on your phone. You gotta do that first. Once you're inside the Tag Mobile app, search for the IPPS-A app, install it, and then you're set. If you need help finding the Tradoc app gateway, I've got a link down in the description below, along with more detailed instructions. Be in control of your own soldier record. I'll see you later.
Okay, so a little tongue-in-cheek there with the video. If you haven't watched some of our videos that we've had, several tied to this IPPS-A series, we've talked talent management, we've talked authoritative data sources, and then this one, of course, is talking mobile. You can go out on the Tradoc App Store today and then download the app. And what really we've been moving towards is getting it out onto the Apple Play Store as well as the Google Play Store. So over the last couple of weeks, we've been successful. We have gotten it out on the Apple Play Store, and the logo, like if you look in the middle of this slide that we're projecting now, that's really sitting on the Apple Play Store, and then Google will be, coming here shortly. Where we are for release 3 is, if you're in the National Guard, you download that app, you can get into your profile, and you're doing actions in the system on your personal mobile phone. If you're an active duty or reserve soldier, this is really pending training. So over the next month, we'll provision everybody in the reserves as well as the active duty to then be able to download this app and then get into your training. Your formalized training for IPPS-A, which gets released in May. And then, of course, when we go live in December, you'll use this same exact app to actually get into the system and do actions. We talk a little bit about AOS and transparency of how do we show structure, how do we show requirements in the system, and then how do you see strength, right? All that ties together. It's very open, transparent with one system. The app's going to close the bar on where are actions in the HR enterprise. So all actions, right, are meant to be routed through IPPS-A. I'm not naive to think that folks will still try to use old 41A7s and send emails, and then even some people will try to use ink pens to sign stuff. But where we are headed is every action is to be in IPPS-A. And then once it's initiated in IPPS-A, either soldier can initiate or the S1 professional can initiate it, then it's tracked. So soldier knows where it is at all times. The leave form is initiated by the soldier. It goes to the supervisor. It's approved. And then it's accessible off your personal mobile device using this app. So in the National Guard, we've had about 19,000 downloads, which I think is okay. It's not great, but I think part of that was because we were having trouble with the download off the Tradoc App Store. Since then we've engaged Tradoc. They've actually made the process much smoother on their site, but then also have facilitated the placement of those apps onto the Apple and the Google Play Store. So again, the Apple Play Store is live as we talk today, and then Google is coming on. But a little bit of instructions on this slide. As a team, we're really proud of this. We think we're in a pretty good spot. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, I would not pass up a chance to talk data correctness. Data correctness. If you're in the active duty, it's primarily about eMilpo. If you are an S1 professional, it is primarily about that. It's also about DTMS, the training system. Are we uploading height, weight? Are we uploading weapons qual primarily? There's a little bit of backlog in uploading folks who should have an APFT that don't. But if you're in the active duty, the focus is eMilpo. If you're in the reserves, it's really TAP DBR. If you're in the National Guard, it's really about Release 2 and IPPS-A. But we've also asked individual soldiers to do some things. And if you look at the far left hand of this slide, it's look at a couple of key things. Look at your DMDC, Mil Connect profile for benefits and your dependents. Look at your ORB or SRB in eMilpo and work with your S1 to correct what's needed, and then also to look at your training transcript at ATARS. All of the individual directions on how to do all of that is sitting in a couple of spots. It's on our webpage. It's also on S1net. I would say go take a look at those if you're not already doing it. We've seen some tremendous increases in accuracy in the active duty and eMilpo, so really appreciate S1s who have focused on that over the past several months. And really we're working towards where we convert data in December of 21 into IPPS-A from those systems that we shut down. So eMilpo being the key one, we'll convert a ton of data at a TAP DBR for the reserve, and then we'll convert Release 2 into Release 3 for the National Guard. So a lot of work there. The far hand right column is really just talking a little bit about what G3 should focus on, or G3s. They should focus on AOS, but as you know, they should also focus on the training system. So your training NCOs, et cetera, are focusing, uploading things for DTMS. We're in a good spot, I believe, folks, but we need to keep driving this as we go through the rest of this year and get ready for our conversion and go live in December of 21. Let's go to the next slide, please. And really just talking a bunch of stuff that we have on our different sites. So a lot of different demos. Those are on YouTube, on our Facebook page. They're on S1net. And then, of course, if you want some specific direction, if you're an organization out in the Army, you can reach into us, and we can really key you into areas to focus on. So I will pause there. Ladies, do we have any other slides?
Thank you, sir. So yeah, as we just kind of wrap this up, I just wanted to say any questions that we didn't answer in the chat, we will definitely post information in our closed Facebook group. This slide has some more information if you're not already a member. So please join that group. There's a lot of good resources and people to help you out, answer questions. And like I said, we will put things that we didn't get to there as well. On the next slide, we just wanted to give a reminder that our next IPPS-A Live will be on 26 April. So please keep an eye out for that. More information will be coming out via social media, S1net, and all of our other channels. And then on the last slide, there is a link and a QR code that will take you to the copy of this deck. And if you need to download them, that's the easiest way to go about that. As we wrap up, I just wanted to say thank you for joining today's IPPS-A Live session, and I will pass it back to Colonel Johnson for parting words.
I think you hit most of it, Harper. So yeah, we're a little bit early, so I'll hold here for a couple of minutes here to see if anyone else wants to ask a question with our remaining time. Ultimately, very pleased with you plugging in today and listening a little bit about AOS. More of that's on our websites and social media channels. But just want to say thank you for continuing to push and get the work done needed before our go live at the end of the year. So with that, Harper, I'll hold for a couple of minutes, and if a question pops up, then we can answer it. If not, we can move on to other tasks for this nice brisk Monday morning here in the DMV.
So, sir, it looks like there is one that came through. What kind of issues arise if the GQAR errors are not addressed prior to cutover and the system brownout in December?
Yeah, I mean, that's an easy one. You take the errors forward with you. So we'll populate IPPS-A with any errors that are not correct. And our data correctness problem becomes our data correctness problem for, week 1 of IPPS-A. So I think that's why it's such a focus for us is, get as much correct right now, and then as I convert data into IPPS-A, it's more correct than if you just wait and then go live. And then the other comment I would make is that it's much, IPPS-A is a pretty big change from how we're operating today. The simple fact that you have soldiers that will be on their mobile phone sending you actions in the S1 shop, and then the S1 shop is digitally managing that workflow, where the actions are, the delegation of authorities for commanders and supervisors. That you really have to be thinking a little more systematically. All of that is probably what you need to be focused on as you go live, not nitnoid data things that we could have solved in 21. Great question though. Appreciate that.
And it looks like one other. If the ASCC G1 and G3 are the owners of creating template billets, who is the owner moving forward for permanent slots when available? And then if there is a cap on templates per division, because some divisions have more than 3,000 unslotted or double slotted personnel.
So I could jump on that question. So that's definitely something, as we've spent the last year plus engaging with ASCCs, ACOMS DRUs across the Army, really helping them understand the processes so that they can implement policies and processes at their level and below. The answer is a little bit different depending on which command we talk about. From what I've seen on the ASCC side, like specifically USARPAC, INDOPACOM, they at the ASCC level, there's a cooperation between G3FM and G1. G3FM kind of manages the structure and the availability of templates in the system. G1 kind of manages the placement. Down at the lower levels, it would be your HR professionals who are actually taking the people and reassigning them out of templates to the actual positions, and you would be doing that in IPPS-A. Once those, the person who's in the position currently moves on to somewhere else, you can take the overstrength guy and or gal and put them in that slot. So that would be an HR pro action to take place inside of IPPS-A. So it would be kind of similar to what you do with reslotting right now in a system like Emailpo. To the question about the cap on templates per division, so no, there is no DA mandated cap on the number of templates within your organizations. So XORD 125-17, which is the Army's implementation guidance for GFMDI, says every command starts with 15% of their authorized strength in templates. However, it is command discretion to increase beyond that. And in many cases, through our Faces to Spaces process, we've identified similar things where many divisions have many more overstrength than others, and in those cases, we're able to provision the required number of templates to handle that. It's definitely, it will at this point remain sort of a command level decision on how many templates they want to have in a particular organization.
And I'm seeing a few more come in. There's a question of who they can reach out to specifically on IPPS-A for their HR, I'm assuming Army organization, specifically with the USAR, AGR accessions.
Well, I would say just send it in to me, and then I'll get it over to our USAR LNO folks. So Colonel Dan McTighe is the lead for our reserve team, but I can make sure that he gets whatever requests for questions that come in. And I'm on the global, Gregory S. Johnson 80, I think.
Yes, sir. There's another from Mr. Houston. Will there be a user level for us to look at the entire Army medical structure?
So within AOS specifically, having user access gives you access to the entire tree. So As a user, you can go into the org hierarchy viewer, expand out any part of the structure you want to look at, and you'll be able to see it there. So you'll be able to see all of Army Medical Command, for example, all the way down to the individual position level.
Okay, so another, definitely a large number of double, triple slotted, and for the 999X series, will there be a roster provided prior to cutover to verify AOS and EMILPO and HERAR UMR?
Yeah, actually, that's been some ongoing work as part of our Faces to Spaces process, where we're taking EMILPO, we're taking AOS, we're building a mega UMR for the entire Army, and then we push every other week or so. We push out those metrics out to the commands. Now the data that we push out publicly is de-identified, anonymized data without PII. However, if a specific command wants to receive the roster with identifiable information, we coordinate with them and transfer the data over DoD Safe, which is PII accredited. So, Chief, if you want, you can contact me after this, and I could provide you with that as well.
All right, well, that's all I'm seeing question-wise for now. Again, if there's other questions you have, please feel free to shoot us a message, and we'll do a roll-up of the Q&A and put that on our closed Facebook group. But otherwise, this has been great. Thank you all so much for joining us, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Harper. Thanks, team.